All right, my English teacher friends, Kristian Kuhn coming at you again, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. And in this video workshop, we're going to use one of my Oscar-nominated shorts yet again. And this one's phenomenal. David Lynch's What Did Jack Do? It's a really, really riveting, absurdist piece. So why would you use this particular lesson plan in your classroom? A couple of reasons. It's a fantastic bell ringer because it teaches kids to pace with regards to constructing their introductory paragraphs. So they got to crank these very fast, and they're going to do so while pulling the strings of my inverted thesis heuristic. And also it allows students to practice their reads. So although we're not doing a poem or a short story or anything like that, I like using film as literature often for practicing writing. So it's a great exercise to get them to hammer home the thesis. So without further ado, let's jump in. But before we do, please subscribe to the channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your students, spread the word far and wide. So as far as locating this particular David Lynch film, again, it's called What Did Jack Do? And it's on Netflix. I don't believe this one is on YouTube, but most folks have Netflix these days, so it is located there. And it's a little longer than the films I normally run. This one, I think, is at the 19-minute mark, so it's a little longer. So it's more than a bell ring with this particular one. So as always with these Oscar-nominated shorts, we start with the following question. So how do I write the introductory paragraph? And I've already alluded to this. We are going to use the inverted thesis heuristic. But before we do, I always say this. In order to make the magic really happen and in order to demystify the writing process for your students, I always encourage teachers to embrace their inner Bob Ross and paint exemplars for their students, just in the same vein that Bob Ross did. So he'd get to his easel and his canvas, and he likewise would use heuristics. He used something called the wet on wet technique. And for introductory paragraphs for literary analysis, so all the FRQs on the AP literature exam, my students systematically employ the inverted thesis heuristic. And then we also have the declarative, which my students use for various tasks on the AP Lang exam. So even if you're an on-level teacher, this is how I do literary analysis across the board. So I've painted these exemplars for you, so you're going to see my writing, and you can use them as a guide to help your students crank their own. But here's the kicker. Implicit in any prompt, and you can go back to the 1970s and investigate this on your own. So any prompt that's really well written for literary analysis, and I always use the College Board as, the anchor, the seminal folks of prompt writing. Implicit in any of those prompts, you got two questions. The first is, what is the author's intent? And the second is, how does the author construct meaning? And what my students do for the inverted thesis is this. How does the author construct meaning constitutes and comprises the answer to that arrives at the thesis statement. So that comes last. That's why we call it the inverted, because you end with the thesis. So it's going to be a 4-sentence move. And what my students do is take 3 sentences to answer the question, what is the author's intent? And teachers have different verbiage for that. They say universal truth, universal theme, the exigence. So however you want to cloak and phrase it is your own device. I say ethereal intent. So that takes 3 sentences and then 1-sentence construction of meaning. So let's take a look at that graphically and see what everything is comprised of. So you're going to end with the thesis. That's going to be the construction of meaning sentence. The first 3 sentences are going to get into the context and background. And all that is the universal truthiness of the piece. Then you want to sprinkle in some tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words. And those that are familiar with my work, you know that I run intensive word study academies throughout the year. And it's very complex. So I got to make some more videos, I know, in my YouTube channel going over those things. So it's very thorough. And then sentence constructs. I rely heavily on Strunk and White's Write It Right, their seminal text, and rule number 18, in which they posit that there's 12 different sentence types. So there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence, and then you can pattern those 20 different ways. So in the thesis in particular, right, in the introductory paragraph, what I tell my students is this: don't parallel your syntax. So most young, emerging, struggling writers will use independent clauses over and over and over again. So teachers, you know this when I say this. It creates a rhythm that sounds like da-da, 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 and you don't want that. And as I've already stated, it's 4 sentences. So let's recap that. 3, authorial intent. 1, construction of meaning. Here's exemplar number 1, and you can see that I color-coded everything for you. I'll break that down in just a second. How about I just read it and then I'll unpack it. So here it is. The modus operandi of the crime genre boils down to one simple point. Nothing matters but the facts. Without incontrovertible proof, the science of any criminal investigation is nothing more than a guessing game. But the conundrum of such hard science pivots upon the fallibility of human inquiry. In his short film, David Lynch spoofs this phenomenon through a mock-serious portrayal of cold case analytics while embracing virtually every known cliché known to mankind. So let's start with the easy stuff. Tier 2 level vocabulary I have highlighted in green. And students don't need to pour it on this thick, right? The idea is that if you use $1 million words, $1 million words, that's not the equivalent of good writing, but you should flex your vocab, but you got to stay in your wheelhouse. And clearly some students have vaster lexicons than others, so they have to find their comfort point. In black, I have the terms, devices, techniques. And when you answer the question, how does the author construct meaning, you got to use the terms, the devices, the techniques. So I got 3 there. In red, for the most part, the first 3 sentences, it's just authorial intent. And then the last sentence is the construction of meaning. You can also see that all my sentences are varied, right? Nothing's running parallel. So each one is different than the one that preceded it. And that's how you do it. Good old 3+1 heuristic of the inverted thesis. So that might be pie in the sky, a little ethereal, a little nebulous. So let's do that again. I've color-coded this one for you as well. I'll read it and then unpack it. Within the typical motifs and plot structure of the crime genre, there are 2 things that matter in a criminal investigation of a subject. One must first ask, what did the person do? And when they did this unpardonable thing, what were they thinking? When one looks at the body of literature that portrays Justice Department investigations and the prosecution of mishandling classified information, these 2 questions are at the pulse of the inquiry's heart rhythm. In his short film, David Lynch lampoons the buffoonery of the department's incompetence by throwing every cliche under the sun at his audience. So let's start with that construction of meaning sentence. So again, it comes last so that it comprises the thesis statement. And I like it when my students do a nice teeter-totter balance between explicitly stating the term and implicitly stating it. So you can see here, in the way that I've worded it, either implicitly or explicitly, I'm getting to the heart of this piece, right? Those are the principal terms, devices, techniques that constitute and comprise the meaning of it. In green, I have my tier 2, but you also see some black up top, right? So it's totally okay to drop terms outside of the last sentence if you feel you need to. So I'm just demonstrating for my students that these are not fast, hard rules. You can break them if you have an intention behind it. But typically, my terms, devices, techniques come in the last sentence. Oh, yes, you can, students. Yes, you can, teachers. I'll show you a 3rd time. It's not that hard. So I'm going to dial back on this one and just keep it really rudimentary. There are intrinsic patterns in every crime story, but in our litigious society, even though condemnation without investigation is touted as the height of ignorance, oftentimes individuals are guilty before the science of inquiry even gets underway. Conceptual ideals of reason, truth, and ethics are often at the forefront of every criminal investigation, but the route taken to arrive at these high principles are often laughable. David Lynch, through hyperbole, arrives at such a sentiment in his mock-serious comedic spin of what is unquestionably the travesty of the justice system. So again, a little explicit, implicit when you drop the terms, the devices, the techniques. There's plenty of green to indicate the tier 2 level vocabulary, and it's a perfect 3+1, 3 authorial intent, 1 construction of meaning at the end. All right, if you're writing with me, pause and have your students have at it. And if you want to get in touch with me, drop me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. In fact, this particular writing workshop came from someone in one of the AP Literature Facebook groups and said, hey, Kristian, you're doing a lot with Oscar-nominated shorts. Check this one out. And I was unfamiliar with it. And I'm a big David Lynch fan. So super cool suggestion. So if you got suggestions, send them my way. Or if you just have a question or want to reach out, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. So I'm very busy in the ELA scene. I'm doing free webinars for perfection learning, applied practice. We'll be presenting for NCTE, the College Board, and I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. So I'm definitely staying busy. If you want to learn more about my PD offerings, you can check out my website at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. And teachers often ask if I come to them, if I come to their department to do PD. I do that about 7, 8, 9, 10 times a year because I am a full-time teacher here in Rochester, New York. So as time permits, I can come to your department to host PD if you want to. Just drop me an email and we can work out the specifics. And then for students, I do own my own tutoring company. I call it Write at Ivy Write. I did all of my graduate degrees at Ivy League schools. I even used to work admissions at Brown University. So come college application time, I'm expert on that and can get you over the hump as far as your personal statement and supplements go. That's it from here. Happy teaching, happy writing. That's it. And I'll keep them coming in the days, months, weeks, years to come. Take care.